How are the threats showing up? What are we seeing that indicates that, yeah, this is going to be a problem?
With every technical wave, there's, it's weaponized very quickly. You go back to, World War One, and you see sort of the mechanization of weapons and the industrialization of those sort of machines. And we see the same thing now, where you can create targeted attacks at an unprecedented scale that's essentially flipping the equation from the attacker to defender, where now they have every tool to be able to craft an attack that's focused in the source of 90% of breaches, a human-centric attack at a scale that's never been before humanly possible.
If a ransomware attack is successful with a certain methodology against, I don't know, a retailer in the UK, is it possible to spin up emergency training for somebody at a different retailer so they don't fall for the exact same thing?
Exactly. That's actually what we started with, that dark web data graph, as well as the OSINT automation. And that adds a layer of enrichment and individualization to all of this. It makes it much more relevant to that person. Inside of our system, top right, you see immediately scams that are relevant to you and your peers. And you can immediately create simulations training, simulations education, as well as remediations around them.
Welcome back to the Security Strategist podcast, your blueprint for evolving cybersecurity. My name is Richard Stiennon, and I'll be your host for this episode. I'm the Chief Research Analyst at IT Harvest, an author, and a trusted advisor to vendors, VCs, and private equity firms. Today, I'm talking with Sage Wohns, who's CEO and founder of Jericho Security. We'll explore how AI is changing cyber threats and what that means for workplace security training. We'll cover the need for a strong security culture and the role of tailored multi-channel attack simulation in a time when breaches are becoming more common. Welcome to the show. Sage, tell us a little bit about your background and how you got to launching Jericho.
Absolutely. My background is in natural language processing. First job out of school was actually at Rakuten in Tokyo, building multilingual systems for their e-commerce software. So taking the core Japanese work, which is very low resource natural language processing work, and making sure that it works globally throughout all the other languages. So first was Cantonese, and then Mandarin, and then Thai and Spanish. And then eventually we got to French and then English, languages I'm more familiar with. And I realized that, at the company, I really valued a lot of the entrepreneurial spirit that Mickey had brought to the company, the founder there. And I got closer and closer to him and caught that entrepreneurial bug and built out a couple prototypes myself, founded a company focused in summarization and knowledge graph creation that was backed by CRV, Point72, Microsoft, and Google. And we primarily built summarization systems for those large tech companies as well as for the DoD. So I happened to be, in the room when GPT-3 dropped, and people were debating whether it is, actually a cyber weapon. And that's where the origination of the company really came from. Now, when the launch of GPT-3 2.5 years ago now, we really had an incredible cyber weapon that could attack and learn from its attacks ad infinitum. And I realized that the world was not ready for that. And met Tim Huang. Actually, he was looking at acquiring my previous company. He's youngest Asian American CEO to go public on the New York Stock Exchange. He also was looking at cybersecurity as his actual third company that he was looking at founding. And we both had that same sort of insight, hence founded the company. Now we're about 2.5 years in with the mission to defend the world from these new threats created by generative AI.
Okay, so let's talk about those threats. That's quite the background that you've got the linguistic background, and you were in the right place at the right time. I love that story. So how are the threats showing up? What are we seeing that indicates that, yeah, this is going to be a problem?
Well, with every technical wave, there's, it's weaponized very quickly. You go back to, World War One, and you see sort of the mechanization of weapons and the industrialization of those sort of machines. And we see the same thing now, where you can create targeted attacks at an unprecedented scale that's, essentially flipping the equation from the attacker to defender, where now they have every tool to be able to craft an attack that's focused in the source of 90% of breaches, a human-centric attack at a scale that's never been before humanly possible. And then also on top of that, the traditional approaches are, I talked to 50 CISOs before I even founded the company. The biggest source of frustration for them was how static and outdated and stagnant the incumbents are in this area. They're dependent on templates or off-the-shelf training that doesn't reflect the fluidity or the contextual nuance of the real-world threats that are emerging every day. And these legacy programs are not covering all the new areas of attacks. They're not covering deepfake voices. They're not covering messaging. They're definitely not covering video. So there is a proliferation as well as the spread of the attack surface that's not being covered yet with these old systems. So our approach was day one, we've got to match the dynamism of the enemy. We've got to match that. And in creating that attack engine, we've actually now assembled the largest data set of generated attacks in the world. And it's annotated by our users. Sometimes the attack simulation efficacy is even higher than what we're seeing in the wild. And that gives us a data set not only to get better and better at attack simulations and education, but ultimately in defense as well.
Yeah, and it only makes sense to use AI to counter AI.
Exactly.
It's an advantage, right? And I agree on the static, right? I've seen so many different approaches to little cartoons, simulations of playing out against these things.
Yeah, it's like when a technology gets stagnant, they start like tacking on other things. Like, you see it with like airplanes most materially, where you go the biplanes, and they had triplanes for a little while. It's like we reached that stage with it. But now you actually can have a totally new engine that's inherently dynamic and can match what the enemy is doing and then exceed them in some areas, as well as, educate the users and ultimately defend the users.
Yeah, the jet engine.
Exactly, the jet engine. Thank you.
The F-80. Yeah.
The F-80 is exactly what we envision here.
I love it. So tell me a little bit about how this is going to change, organizations, right? Who, even if, some of them have to have a security awareness training program because of regulations, but others, see the emerging threat and want to get ahead of it. Tell us what they should be doing.
Yeah, well, our mantra is attack, educate, defend. And so we do attack simulations again at a DoD and nation state level of sophistication, leveraging OSINT as well as dark web data to make it really personalized and realistic. And then the education flows directly from that, so it's also individualized and can be informed from that data to be able to say, like, this is the data that can be used against you. Watch out for this. This is how you protect yourself from that. Then ultimately, we're training novel defenses based off of that, where now with generative models, you can have probabilistic defenses instead of rule-based, which is a real innovation in this field too. So that's really what we go back to: attack, educate, defend.
Tell me about that probabilistic, as opposed, we know the rule-based stuff. It's scripted.
Exactly. And there aren't really rules in attacking anymore. People aren't using templated attacks. I haven't seen a Nigerian print scam in years. So how on earth
I get those all the time still.
Oh, you still get those?
Yep.
The one that hasn't slowed down actually is clearly like LinkedIn data being weaponized, where I get, change of bank accounts from like everyone across the company, just like filling up my inbox every day. But that one has not changed. I saw that pre-generative. I see that post-generative. It's just gotten more sophisticated now. But the probabilistic defenses are necessary now because they aren't following templates or rules anymore in the attack scenarios. They're following more sort of probabilistic scenarios. So perhaps you and I can be attacked with the same general thesis, maybe like a DocuSign or something like that. But it will be, or, a document that we interact with every day, or a web service that, one of us subscribe to that the other one doesn't, and maybe there was a breach there. But it will be basically around that same genre instead of specifically saying like anything from, a lookalike Google logo, but it's not from actually the Google domain. So that rule-based approach is now quickly outpaced because you can have probabilistic attacks where not every attack is the same. And we don't see that yet on defense. So there's an immense opportunity to be able to create a matching technology there. It's why we utilize a series of large language models, not just one on the attack scenario, but also on the blue team to be able to train off of the attack data to ultimately defend our users from this new wave of generative attacks.
Yeah, so another analogy beyond the jet engine is the shift from signature-based virus defense to EDR, which looks at the what's going on, right? The behavior of stuff. So, and what kind of early reaction are you getting from the poor employees that have to go through security awareness training?
Yeah. Well, one of the first things that we did is it's a pretty superficial observation, but if you look at a lot of the, progenitors in this space, it's black and purple. We worked with the best design firm in the world when we first designed our application. That was one of the first things that they said. There's if you look at all the places, they really go for fear. That's really what they're trying to emote. This area is naturally scary enough. So we actually want to go for psychological safety over punishment. That's statistically what we've seen from every study, from our partners in the consulting space actually work in security cultures. There are some, places that we know are very punitive, where if people fall for too many phishing scams, they get fired and definitely reprimanded. But what we've seen actually work really well at scale is encouraging employees to report a mistake without fear of blame. Because now with a generative attack, I know we can get people to click. I know that we can get anyone to click. That is absolutely table stakes now. It's what they do afterwards that really matters. And that depends on security culture. So we celebrate the defenders. We highlight positive security behaviors like you would with a top salesperson or top engineering wins. And you make security feel, relevant and human too. We do deep fakes for, a lot of the training. So we'll actually have a familiar face or a familiar voice or a familiar setting. One of our clients, a famous chicken wing restaurant, actually has chicken wing teaching theirs as well as ranch sauce. Some of the other ones have talking cars or spiders or things like that, just to be able to be, reflect their culture. We use examples that are grounded in their roles and individual sort of communication channels as well, not abstract threats. And that speaks to, the leveling up from, the biplane to now the jet engine, where we can actually create something that's targeted to the individual. And like a phishing email to an accountant, could be totally different than a salesperson. And even across accountants, we can use a, breach data password or something like that to be able to make it really individualized. So we embed these principles in every layer of our stack, attacking, education, and defense, by making everything, very conversational, engaging, and contextual, and feedback rich.
You mentioned the using breach credentials that have leaked. What about other levels of using threat intelligence if a ransomware attack is successful with a certain methodology against, a retailer in the UK? Is it possible to spin up, emergency training for somebody at a different retailer so they don't fall for the exact same thing?
Exactly. That's actually what we started with, that dark web data graph, as well as the OSINT automation. And that adds a layer of enrichment and individualization to all of this. It makes it much more relevant to that person. Inside of our system, top right, you see immediately scams that are relevant to you and your peers. And you can immediately create simulations training, simulations education, as well as, remediations around those. And that's just with one click. And then if you go into the app, you actually see benchmarking your performance against your peers. That sort of peer education is incredibly relevant, and I think very unique to cybersecurity as well, where people, share that information and everyone benefits from it.
Yeah, I love making it, addressing real and present dangers, not forcing people to go through the same security awareness training that they had at the last job, 10 years ago. I know, I got to change my password every month. Don't tell me again.
Yeah. And, just It's not only where they worked last, but also just like unrelated companies. They're all doing the same training. It's like that's not relevant to them. So now with generative systems, it can be targeted down to the individual. And that's something that, again, that jet engine.
What you described so far sounds like you're creating the content, or your solution is creating the content. What sort of control does the customer have over what's being presented that week to employees?
Yeah, this is all about empowering that customer to be able to create something that's consistent with their culture as well as their vision for their security org. So those tools are all in the customer's hands to be able to create that attack simulation across those different channels. They can choose what data to leverage in those attack simulations, and inside of that education, they can choose, and also imagine a really customized avatar, or having their office in the background, or having a chicken finger teach it for them. The spider one was just new as of yesterday. I just saw one of our clients was requesting. I was like, this is great. They're creating their own avatars that can really, they can recognize. It's funny. One of our top salespeople actually, she did a deep fake for a client, and then they just started using it for all of their training. So when she came on a call for a renewal, they're like, "Oh, you're real! Like we haven't seen you before."
And she said, "You think I'm real?"
Exactly.
So speaking of things like that, what are some of the more sophisticated, kind of AI assisted attacks that you've seen out there that need, people to be aware of?
My favorite ones, which are really scary and people fall for all the time, are multi-channel. Not just, email anymore, but followed up with a text message, a voice call, or a video. Those are highlighting the risk of what we've seen. They are very anecdotal now, clearly like generative enhanced, but, a human on the back end, of course, running a lot of those. And there's early, indicators of that happening across the board. There was the famous Hong Kong Bake example that happened a couple of years ago. That was a multi-channel attack. And we've seen more and more of those recently too, as that technology gets increasingly commodified. And those are typical multi-factor authentication routes. One of the things that we used to say was like, try them over text, try them over, a voice call to be able to validate that. It's like, that's not really the best route anymore. And you specifically see that in finance communities where those used to be, authentication methods for wiring. So that has been compromised now. So we need to be able to educate people about those risks and offer new defenses to be able to protect them from those. And that sort of hyper-personalized approach as well, where, through OSINT automation, you can easily get, not only people's coworkers through something like LinkedIn, but you can get, family members too. And then if, the kid has a Instagram account, they can use that to be able to rip the voice. We've seen that happen repeatedly now, especially with our DoD associated clients. So being able to make them aware of that, educate them, is increasingly important because that technology is, absolutely omnipresent now. Everyone has it on their phones.
Absolutely. So tell me this, if you had to summarize one key takeaway from our talk for CISOs, CTOs, CIOs, other IT decision makers out there, what would it be and why?
So we are now in the age of AI-driven threats at a nation-state level. And your workforce is either your greatest vulnerability or your strongest defense. And the key is moving from a checkbox training to dynamic, human-centered, AI-enabled readiness. So please emphasize culture, and we can all win this together.
Thank you so much, Sage, for joining us today. We had a great conversation about these multi-channel attack simulations. And also thank you to everyone listening. We hope you took a lot away from today's podcast. For further information on what we've talked about, please head over to jerichosecurity.com. We'll be back next week with another episode in our podcast series. Until then, make sure you subscribe to this podcast on all major platforms and follow the conversation on our socials at EM360Tech on Twitter and LinkedIn. And for more great daily content, head on over to em360tech.com.